Greetings, welcome to Facts About Everything. I'm your host, James Egan. First, we'll be looking at the 21st President of the United States, Chester A. Arthur, who most people recognize from Die Hard with a Vengeance. His middle name was Allen. He was named after the doctor that delivered him, Chester Abel. Chester was so obsessed with fashion that he got the nickname Gentleman Boss, the Dude President, Prince Arthur, and Elegant Arthur. He owned 80 pairs of pants. Due to his mutton chops and round face, he was known as the Walrus. Chester loved playing the banjo. Chester is the first president to take the oath in his home. He didn't make an inaugural address. He was an excellent fisherman and once caught an 80-pound bass off the coast of Rhode Island. He would go for walks around Washington, D.C., sometimes as late as 4 a.m. He rarely went to bed before 2 a.m. He once said, "Men may die, but the fabrics of free institutions remains unshaken." His opponents accused Chester of being Canadian and therefore he couldn't be eligible for the American presidency. However, even if he was Canadian, which he denied, his mother was an American citizen, which allowed him to run for president. Before Chester was president, American citizens would not say, "What time is it?" Instead, they would say, "What time do you have?" Back then, it was very difficult to maintain an exact time for everyone to agree on. However, Chester requested standardized time in Washington, D.C. in October 1884. His wife, Ellen Herndon, died before he took office. He had no vice president. His sister became the first lady. He had 24 wagon loads of furniture from the White House sold in an auction. Some of the pieces dated back to John Adams's presidency and we regard it as priceless today. When Rutherford B. Hayes' term ended, he was replaced by James A. Garfield. Since Garfield died after a few months before Chester was sworn in, this is the second time there were 3 presidents in 1 year. 2 days before he died, he had all of his personal and official papers burned. He died from a kidney illness called Bright's disease. His final words were, "Life is not worth living." The 22nd President of the United States was Grover Cleveland. His real name was Steve Grover. He was the first overweight president. Chester A. Arthur looked fat, but he just had a big face. He actually wasn't that heavy. Grover battled with his weight most of his life, which is why he was known as Big Steve and Uncle Jumbo. He is a direct descendant of General Moses Cleveland, the founder of Cleveland, Ohio. This is why he took on that name. Grover was the first president to get married in the White House. Grover used to be a hangman. He hanged 2 people. He had 8 siblings, which put a massive strain on his father's finances. Grover had to quit school several times to help his father raise money. He was accused of fathering out of wedlock with Maria Halpin in 1874. He once said, "The ship of democracy, which has weathered all storms, may sink through the mutiny of those on board." He was the 6th cousin once removed of President Ulysses S. Grant. Grover knew his wife since the day she was born. The Statue of Liberty was dedicated to Grover on October 28, 1886. He vetoed over 300 bills during his presidency. That is more vetoes than the previous 21 presidents combined. Grover actually won the re-election, but due to fraudulent voting, Benjamin Harrison became the next president. Benjamin had pet opossums named Mr. Protection and Mr. Reciprocity? I don't know. Reciprocity? I could do this all day. I've practiced that 50 times. I can't do it. Just move on. He also had a goat called Whiskers. He was the grandson of President William Henry Harrison. Benjamin was 7 when his grandfather was elected president. This makes Benjamin the first grandson of a former president. He was the first president to use electricity in the White House. It was installed by Edison General Electric Company. Benjamin and his wife refused to use the light switches because they were afraid they would be electrocuted. They usually went to bed with the lights on. He's the only president to be from Indiana, the state. He once said, "We Americans have no commission from God to police the world." He was the first president to have a Christmas tree in the White House. He didn't drink for religious reasons. Benjamin made a lot of speeches. In 1 month, he made 140 speeches. He was the first president to have his voice preserved. In 1889, a 36-second speech was recorded on a phonograph. Here it is.
President of the United States, I was present at the third Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C. Believe that with God's help, our 2 countries shall continue to live side by side in peace and prosperity. Benjamin Harrison.
He was so formal and stiff when he was talking to people, he was known as the human iceberg. During his presidency, Congress appropriated $1 billion in annual spending for the first time. His father's body was stolen by grave robbers. He was eventually returned. Not to life, so like the location, you know what I mean. He is the only president to lose a re-election to a former president. 6 new states joined the Union during his presidency, the most of any president. Since he was only 5'6", his rivals called him Little Ben. He was known as Kid Gloves, as he often wore gloves to protect himself from infection. Sadly, it didn't work because he died after contracting influenza. His final words were, "Are the doctors here?" Probably not. The 24th president was Grover... Wait, didn't I already do this guy? As you can see, Grover is the only president to hold the office twice non-consistently. This gets really confusing when somebody says Trump is the 46th president, but it's like he's not. He's the 46th person to be elected president, but he's technically the 45th president. It's a huge headache, so... Selfish Grover. In the beginning of his second term, he had top secret surgery to remove a tumor from his mouth. Sadly, Grover lost most of his upper jaw to remove the tumor successfully. In 1895, he became the first American president to be filmed. In the film clip, he is shown signing a new bill into law. His image was on the $1,000 bill until it was discontinued in 1945. He died of an intestinal obstruction. His final words were, "I have tried so hard to do right." William McKinley was the 25th president. He was the first president to ride in an automobile. When he was shot, he was transported to the hospital in an ambulance. My puppy's having nightmares, hold on. Do you hear that? It's cute. He's still going. He's my friend. He once said, "War should never be entered upon until every agency of peace has failed." He had a Mexican parrot called Washington Post. His parrot could whistle the Yankee Doodle tune. That's really impressive. I can't even whistle. Is that it? He also had two kittens called Valeriano, Waylett, and Enrico de Lome. He put way too much effort into naming his pets. My pet fish is literally called Fish. His face was on the $500 bill. It was discontinued in 1934. His wife, Ida, hated yellow passionately, just like my wife. She hated the color so much she removed all yellow things from the White House. She even removed the yellow flowers from the garden, just like my wife. He was the first president to use a telephone to campaign. His inauguration was the first to be filmed. During the Civil War, his commanding officer was President Rutherford B. Hayes. In the 1896 election, McKinley won despite the fact that he campaigned from his front porch in Ohio, while his opponent traveled extensively by railway and spoke at 600 events. I'll assume that guy was a huge sore loser, and I don't think anyone would blame him for that. McKinley loved carnation flowers and always had one on his buttonhole in public. On September 6, 1901, he gave it to a little girl at the Pan American Exposition. He was shot seconds later and died after 8 days. He was killed by Leon... Give me a second. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm just going to make an educated guess how to say this guy's name, and then I'm going to check the correct way. Leon Czolgosz. Let's have a look. Nope, not even close. Leon Czolgosz. After he was shot by Czolgosz, the crowd pinned down the murderer and beat him. McKinley cried out, "Boys, don't let them hurt him." McKinley was shot twice in the stomach by Czolgosz. This is normally not a life-threatening place to be shot, but the doctors couldn't find the bullet. His final words were, "Goodbye all, goodbye. It is God's way. His will be done." Special thanks to these fine people for all their help. Thanks for watching. See you again.